Greetings and good day. This is Christopher Fries here at Fries Forge. Today I'm going to try and recreate a historical find of a Viking Seax. So the Seax that I am making is from a historical find. I'll show a picture of it now. So I've taken from that photo the best measurements that I could using a hand as a reference. My hand is 8 centimeters, and so I'm using that in reference to the person's holding it hand, and so I'm hoping that that's going to be accurate. It probably isn't going to be exact, but it's going to do. It should be proportionately the same. It might be a little bigger or a little smaller overall, but proportionally it should be bang on. The blade is 32 centimeters, and the tang is 20 centimeters. The spine is 8 millimeters, and the belly of the blade here is 4 centimeters total. It's a single bevel. It tapers from 8 centimeters all the way down to a razor edge point, and that is what that looks like from cross section. So I've never tried anything this specific before, this precise before. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, but I'm sure going to try, and I will either come out with an amazingly historically accurate looking piece of Seax, or I'll have something close to it. Either way, I'm going to learn a whole lot, and hopefully you can learn something from it as well if you are a blacksmith yourself, and if you just like watching people make cool knives, then that's great too.
The stock that we're using for this Seax is from a leaf spring, so that's 5160 steel. It's a great steel. It's really my favorite steel to use. You find me if I'm making a blade that I'm using 5160. But it's about twice as wide as we need it to be, a total of 6 centimeters. So I'm marking out 3 centimeters, and then we're going to cut that in half using the angle grinder. This is a rather long and arduous process, but it's the only thing that I have that works to cut this kind of metal. A metal cutting bandsaw will be advantageous, but it does allow for some cool slow-mo. Look at all the sparks. Yay. So I've measured back the total distance of the blade, 32 centimeters, and I'm marking that out here now. This is just a vague reference point so that I get an idea of the size of my blade and how much material has been drawn out in the forging process. And so it ends up not being true case, but it gives me a kind of a point of reference to work from, or towards, whichever way you want to think of it. Now, instead of forging out the tang first and then moving towards the blade, because I'm trying to set this blade at a specific distance or a specific length, I want to first set the blade length before I move towards the tang, so that way I make sure that the blade is really exactly where I want it to be. I can then move to the tang, where I have extra material, and kind of play with that until I get it to where I want it to be. 5160 is a really good steel. It performs very well when it's all finished, but it doesn't move very well under the hammer. I'm hitting the metal very hard, and yet it still moves very, very slowly. This is both an advantage and a disadvantage, I find. The disadvantage is it takes longer to forge. The advantage is the forging ends up being a little bit more precise. So now we have the initial tip all but set. It's time to move into forging of the bevel, the initial forging of the bevel. Now you'll notice that I'm forging it about halfway, even though that this is going to be a single bevel. Now what I'm doing here is I forge it halfway, and then I go back over the area that I have not yet hammered and forge that into the previously forged bevel in order to create one single bevel that goes from the spine to the edge. I don't know if this is the correct way to go about this. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. And it did work. I was able to achieve the effect that I wanted in that I was able to create that triangle, that single bevel. But there might have been an easier way to go about it. I'm not really sure. You can see here there's a great deal of scale. I had my oxygen turned up far too high, and as a result, it scales up quite badly and leaves a lot of what's called scale pitting. I correct the oxygen levels here now, and you can see that the scale is far, far less. And as a result, so too is the scale pitting. The forging of these bevels causes a constant need to re-straighten the blade. So here I am doing a technique called slapping, I think, in which I basically just take the spine of the blade and hit it until the metal goes back straight. And then it's right back into the forging of the bevels. You can see the blade, the belly of the blade is much wider than the parent stock now. That's great. That's exactly what I'm going for. I started with a steel that was 3 centimeters in total width, and now I'm stretching that out to a steel that's a little bit over 4 centimeters in total width. But of course, that causes the need for more anvil slapping. But I'm finding that it's not really being all that effective. I think it's just because I didn't have the steel hot enough. But I decided that I would try something different here, and though I don't have a mallet, I do have just some scrap wood laying around, some 2x4, and so I used that and smacked that down, and that seemed to work fairly well, actually. I was quite pleased with that. Now, if you notice, there's a bit of a bulge at the spine of the blade towards the tip here. So I need to correct that. And what I'm going to do is put the edge on the flat of the anvil so that that will move very little, and then start hammering onto that bulge with the rounding die in order to smush it out. And then I'll go over to the horn and try and draw that smushed out part forward towards the tip. What I intend to end up with here, and in fact do, is 3 tapers. I have the taper from the spine to the blade, I have the taper from the towards the tip, and then I also have a distal taper as well, making for 3 different tapers all on the tip. It's kind of interesting. Now my total distance is set, my 32 centimeters has been met, and it's time to start work on the tang. This tang is rather interesting. It stepped down several times. It's a hidden tang, but it's quite strong in the way that it has been made. So the initial step down is a total of 3 centimeters, and then it steps down to a total of 2 centimeters, and then is drawn out to its total length, making for a very strong yet hidden tang. It's an interesting way of doing it, and I think it's something that I'm going to repeat in future hidden tang knives, simply because it does work so well. This is an ingenious way to create a very strong knife with as little steel as possible. One of the drawbacks of a hidden tang is that it can be weaker than a full tang. This negates that. One of the more difficult parts of this process was drawing out and trying to get a nice even 3 centimeter to 2 centimeter taper on the initial part of the tang. I achieved it, but it was not easy. Thankfully, it's time to move on to the drawing out. That's not usually a sentence that you hear somebody forging metal to say, but that initial part of the tang really did give me a lot of grief. And so I was kind of happy to move on to something I'm a little bit more comfortable and used to doing. The drawing out of this could have been done much quicker in a lot fewer heats if I had gone to the edge of the anvil and forged half on, half off, as I do know how to do. But I was concerned that if I did that, I would end up going too far. And so I opted for a slower but more controlled method, and that is drawing out over the horn. In hindsight, it may have been beneficial for me to have simply started with half on, half off. My initial fears of going too far appear to be invalid, and I actually try half on, half off right here, and it works unbelievably well, and I'm somewhat disappointed with myself and taking far more heats than I needed to in order to simply draw out the tang. Using a flatter here to try and bring the highs down to the lows, making everything nice and even. Now we come to what is my favorite part of forging a blade, and that is water forging the bevel. This is my favorite part for several different reasons. Primarily, it's because it leaves a very clean, smooth surface on the blade, and it's very satisfying to come out with something that's not covered in scale pitting. It also has the effect of cleaning up scale pitting from the initial forging of the bevel, which I absolutely love as well. And you're so much closer now to the final product. You really get a sense of what you've accomplished so far, and you get to really see where your blade is going to be, what it's going to look like, because you're so close to the end. It's a wonderful, wonderful part. How this works? Well, we put a little bit of water on the anvil, make sure there's no scale on the anvil here. I'm using a piece of minecart track because it really allows me to not so much worry about marring up the surface of my anvil. And then with the water on both sides, you proceed to hit and see that explosion of scale and steam that comes out from underneath there. It's really neat to do. And of course, with the forging of any bevels, although it's substantially less than it was initially with the initial forging of the bevels, you still end up with a little bit of banana curving. And so we come back with our 2x4, although I'm going to need to pick myself up an actual mallet, and we straighten that all back out. And with that, the forging of my blade is essentially complete. Now I'm just coming back with my little hammer and fixing any little spots here or there that need to be corrected. And mostly it's just minor straightening. The blade itself is 97% straight, but I just come back and make sure everything's all in perfect alignment. Everything's where it should be, because after I set this here, I'm basically not going to touch the metal with heat again. So I really want to make sure that it's all perfect, that it's all where I want it to be, and that's what I've got. Well, the forging of my Seax is all complete. I'm very pleased with how it turned out. It is just so smooth. There's very minimal scale pitting. I'm really happy with how this actually turned out. I spent a lot of time measuring and making sure that everything was exactly where I wanted it to be, checking and double checking. As a result, this has been the longest amount of time that it has taken me to forge
any blade thus far. That being said, this is also the largest blade that I have ever forged thus far. So, I'm not quite sure where I'm at. But I really enjoyed making this. I hope you enjoyed watching me get to this point. If you are not currently subscribed, be sure to subscribe. If you are, there's a little bell that you can click on, and that will alert you to when the next video comes out, and that will be the grinding, filing, shaping, and handling of this sax. Well, that's all for me today. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, please do leave a like, comment, and let me know what I could have done better in the forging of my sax. I'm eager to know and to improve. May the force serve you well.